Sound awakens something deep within. Welcome to this podcast, a space to slow down, tune in, and return to the song of your soul. In this episode, I am so thrilled to be joined once again by Kathleen Karlsen. In our first conversation, she opened the door to the world of sacred sound. Today, she takes us even deeper, sharing personal, powerful stories of how mantras have brought healing, clarity, and transformation to her life and others. It is an episode full of heart, resonance, and real magic. Hi, Kathleen. Welcome to our podcast again. And today is our second episode, and I'm excited to know all about how you got into vocal medicine, like picking that name for your website and for your offering and everything.
Right. Um, it was mostly because I started out my whole journey in life trying to figure out why I was here on earth, in the healing realm.
Right.
So I was gonna go to medical school and all of that. And and then I think the idea was that when I started studying all of the like things from the Church of Religious Science or the Unity Church or all the new thought Christian kind of things, which was, I went through a period like in my early 20s really studying that and attended those organizations. And it was, like Louise Hay, her book on Heal Your Body. So it was the idea that what you say and what you think is creating your reality. So the vocal medicine, it's not only the mantras, which are creating form and, changing your trajectory in one direction or another. But it's also the idea that when you communicate with people, when you are exchanging thoughts, when you are um, using your voice for affirmation, using it for praise rather than criticism as much as possible in your life, that's a form of medicine, that's a form of healing. So it was sort of a way to encompass those ideas as well as the mantras. So
That's beautiful. And you came up with your book's name also as vocal medicine. It's kind of around the same idea, right?
that came first.
Oh,
So it
okay.
was that. So the book came first. That was like 2019.
Okay.
And I'd been playing kirtan and mantras for a couple of years at that point, and I had gone through a whole evolution. I started with world chant, and the idea was, the chants and the sacred music of all different cultures. But as I went through, what I really resonated with was Hinduism
Mm-hmm.
and Buddhism and Christianity. So it was really focused on those three, and occasionally there would be something else. And so I had a small band at that point, and the tabla player only wanted to play Eastern things. He didn't want to play any of the stuff that, I had that was Western stuff. So he kept pushing me like, yeah, we should have a name that reflects like what we're doing because we're not doing African and Egyptian and Celtic and, whatever. So then we became Shakti Bliss, and we were that for quite a while. But then when COVID hit, that band broke up. We couldn't rehearse, we couldn't play, we had to cancel things that we had scheduled. So then one so the tabla player who lives like an hour drive from here. So he was making a 2-hour round trip every week to rehearse and every month
Wow.
to do a kirtan.
Okay.
So he was a little more isolated, and we just started working with four of us that were right here, close in town. And then I said, okay, this is when I want to switch because, I was already it was like the band was named one thing and the book was named something else and my website was something else. I thought everything's going to come under vocal medicine. So the band became Vocal Medicine Kirtan, and then I have the book and then the website and the YouTube channel. Everything became vocal medicine. So the book came first, and then the kirtan, the music, sort of caught up to it later.
That's beautiful, Kathleen. Yeah, and it kind of blends beautifully, vocal medicine. So then tell me, like, what inspired you to write your book, and what was your favorite um, section in your book that you were wanting to really let people know?
Okay. What inspired me to write the book? I would say one thing that inspired me is that I have found the process of writing to be like super healing for myself. Before I was doing mantras, probably in my mid 40s, um, I had just reached a point in life where my health wasn't very good. I was struggling in my marriage. I already had 4 kids. I think I didn't quite have 5 kids yet. And and I started journaling. I thought, all right, I have to, like, I didn't like the direction things were going in my life. Like, I have to work on myself. I can't change all these things around me. I have to work on myself. So I started journaling, and because I already had 4 kids at that point and was busy all day long, I was working part-time teaching art and music. And I started typing a journal and just was sort of stream of consciousness. It was biographical to a certain degree, but not necessarily chronological. And what happened was I would, things would come up that I hadn't thought of forever. Like for example, when I was a teenager, there was a very close friend of the family that committed suicide. And it was like I literally could not remember going to the funeral. It was like I had to have gone to the funeral, but it was complete blank. And so what would happen is I would be writing after the kids went to bed, so from 8 or 9 o'clock at night, halfway through the night, and I would be like sobbing about these things that I didn't even realize, were still there. So I did that for 5 or 6 months, and it was funny because my husband said, "Well, if you want to heal yourself," because I was having back problems and neck problems and all kinds of stuff, thyroid problems at that point. Um, you have to get enough sleep. And I said, "Well, you know what? I've been sleeping my whole life, and this is where I'm at. So now I'm going to try something different." So, of course, I was really short on sleep during that whole period because I would get up and have a full day with 4 kids. But after 5 or 6 months, I finished the whole thing, and I gave it to a few close friends to read, and then someone who was more professional editor, and then I discussed it with a couple of my really close friends, and they said, "Well, you have to think about it because if you put this book out, which was all the tragedy and trauma of my life, if you put this book out, like that will be your image. That's who you will be. You'll be like a survivor." And I really thought about it, and I thought, well, maybe that's not the image I want. So I was meditating. Um, my favorite way to meditate at that point in my life was just to lay in bed. So I woke up one Sunday morning, I was laying in bed, just meditating on what should I do with this manuscript. And I decided that I was going to burn it. I was going to, delete all the digital copies, burn it, just release the whole thing. So the interesting thing was when I made that decision, like before I even got out of bed, the phone rang. So we had a lot of financial problems at that point as well. And the phone rang, and somebody contacted me and wanted like a full package of marketing. My husband and I were running a marketing company at that point. I was like, well, that's interesting. Like I made that decision. And before I got out of bed, I had a whole new client who wanted videos and websites and business cards and logos and everything. The next morning, less than 24 hours later, I got a call from another friend who said, "I'm starting a new company and I want to know if you can do technical writing and video production in the software field." And that client, I worked for them for like 13 years after that. My husband still works for them full time. And working for them completely turned our financial world around. So that gave me the means to take some time to pursue healing. So it was like everything followed from that. So all I'm saying is that because I'd had the experience,
Right.
that writing was so healing for me, and that I thought that other people reading what I was writing with the intention of providing tools for healing versus going through and explaining my own trauma in life, that this would be a way to, create something that was really positive because my life had completely changed after doing the journaling and the work that it took to release everything, that had happened earlier in life. So that was where I started with it. And then the structure, the the central part of the book is really oriented around the chakras
Mm.
and the deities
Yep.
associated with the chakras, and then, the colors and the mantras and the things that you can do. So it was just sort of like a skeleton, a way to structure all the material. But my favorite part of the book is actually the next section, which is on the synergy between different healing methods. So the synergy between mantras and using visualization, mantras and using color. I had done a lot of study because my master's degree was looking at the history of combinations of sound and music, combinations of the arts. So that's my favorite part because it's so holistic.
Right.
It's like every sound is related to a certain color and every color is related to a certain form, and it's all one. So that's my favorite part.
That's awesome. Yeah, I remember reading those parts and I couldn't stop reading. I kept going, 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 trying to learn more. So it was very intriguing. Thank you for putting that out there for all of us. Um, so you think part of your journey of getting that positive energy into your life was followed your release of what was pent up within you?
Yes, exactly. So it was like I went through that because I hadn't found mantras yet. That was a period in my mid 40s, and I hadn't found mantras yet. And it was almost like going through that process was clearing the way for what was to come. And then, it was about 7, 8 years ago that I found mantras. I was like, this is it. This is the vehicle to take me forward, from where I am now. So yes, it was like the precursor, like the,
Yeah,
the cleansing for the healing or
yeah.
something like that.
Make room for more good stuff to enter. Yeah.
Right.
So, is there a specific chant that you would like to share with us, or that I know you talked about Rama, right, last time, but is there something more?
I would say the other one that I do a lot ongoing now for years is the medicine Buddha mantra, which is
Haven't heard.
Teyata Om Bekanze Bekanze Maha Bekanze
Haven't heard.
Ranza Samu Gate Soha. And that one, the meaning of it is you're calling for the medicine of the Buddha, which is the teachings of the Buddha at different levels. So at the physical level, the emotional level, and then at the level of the spirit or the soul. So that's why it's Bekanze, Bekanze. It's repeated 3 times. And that one was really significant to me personally. At one point, probably 3 years ago now, my youngest son, um, out of the blue, turned up with a very serious health condition. He had cysts along his spine and they had become infected. So I didn't know anything about this. He told me about it in August, just before he was starting, I guess, his sophomore year in high school. And when he showed me a photo of what was going on, he didn't want to show me because he was, 15-year-old boy, and it was all the way down from the bottom of his spine up. So so we went to urgent care, and they said, we need to refer you to a general surgeon. And I was sort of in shock. And over the course of the next few weeks, the situation just kept getting worse and worse. No matter what they did, they couldn't get the infection under control. So he had major surgery, a few weeks into his sophomore year, and missed an entire semester of school. And what happened was the morning, so we were going in 3 times a week, to have the wound cleaned and antibiotics applied and everything else. And we didn't know what was coming. They were trying to clear up the infection before the surgery, which would have been much safer all around. So we had an appointment, and I got up one morning, and this was probably the 3rd week of September. I got up that morning, and I was just like in physical pain, like just so anxious and so concerned that he was just getting worse. And when we walked into the doctor's office for his appointment after school, the nurse said, "Well, we're going to take you upstairs to surgery." And we were like, "Is she joking?" Because there had been a miscommunication and we hadn't gotten the warning that that like the doctors decided we have to do surgery now. And that morning when I got up and I was so anxious, not knowing what was coming, by the time I thought I have to find a mantra for this. And I searched online, had never heard of the Medicine Buddha mantra, found the mantra. This is like 4 in the morning because I tend to get up really early. So, I was learning the mantra, from 4, 5, 6, 7 o'clock in the morning. And then I had to take him to school. And at lunchtime, I was so stressed out. I just ended up sick in bed, which is also pretty unusual for me. And then I thought, I have to get up. I have to get up. I have to go and record that song. And then I have to go pick him up from school. So I went downstairs and just literally had like what they call a handy end microphone, which is like an all-in-one recorder, recorded the song, just with no other instruments, nothing else. Recorded the song, went pick him up from school, and that night he ended up having surgery. So this was September 2020. So 4.5 years ago, I guess it's more than 3 years. So the hospital was deserted because no one was allowed in. It was like at the height of COVID. And so even his dad wasn't allowed to come to the hospital room where he was. None of his siblings could come. They let me stay, and it was just this eerie feeling sitting in this reception area. It was dark outside. It was 10 o'clock at night. The surgery took a lot longer than they expected. And there was a piano there. So I sat down and started playing the piano and, could remember that mantra and stayed with him all night in the hospital. And it was like every time I woke up, I heard that mantra. So it just became I came home, he was recovering from then until Christmas time. He had a wound back, which I never heard of before, but they had to keep the whole area sealed because the wound was too big to suture. So I was just with him all the time from that point. He did come home the next day. And so that became like an anthem. And I had a group of people, maybe 10 or 12 people that were chanting with me regularly at that point. So I created a slideshow with pictures of his life and sent it out with that music behind it and asked people, if they would do a vigil. So that story, I couldn't even tell that story for years without crying because it was just like, so personal to me that I found that mantra not even knowing what we were going into that day, and that we were going to be in months of very intense healing. I mean, it was really something. It was like they had to call in all kinds of specialists because he ended up with MRSA after the surgery. And it was those 5 or 6 months were like probably the most intense in my life. And that mantra was like a life raft. It was like part of me, it was playing all the time. And if I was quiet, then I could hear it. So that mantra, and now every time, I have a couple of really close friends here in town that chant all the time, and every time there's something, everyone's like, "Oh, Medicine Buddha. Okay, I'm gonna go do the Medicine Buddha." So that's a really important mantra for me.
Thank you for sharing. That's a very heartwarming story and very uplifting too, because it came from the bottom of your heart. Like that mantra kind of rose up
Yeah.
when it was most needed, and it was with you the whole time, and it just kept you going and gave that healing power to your son to just heal from inside out. And
Yeah.
the surgery, oh my gosh, without even scheduling, they just
It
did
was
it.
wild. It was wild. I mean, I was just in shock. I kept the doctor called me after the surgery and he said, he kept saying, it was more extensive than we thought it was going to be. I said, what are you saying? He said, let me put it this way. If he's healed by Christmas, if the wound is healed by Christmas, I'll be happy. I said, Christmas? It's September. I mean, I was just in shock. And I remember reading, I think it's the book, Betty Eadie's book, about her near-death experience. And she says when she's on the other side, that she sees like these beams of light coming from the earth up to heaven. And she asks what they are. And she's told that those are the prayers of mothers for their children.
Because this is giving me chills because few years ago, one of the moms, she told me like prayers of the mothers are the most beautiful and most powerful of all. So if you, I mean, she was talking to me, if you have anything, if you have to pray, just keep doing it. So that always keeps me going, because there are days where I'm like, okay, I don't want to pray today. I
Right.
don't feel up for it. But that's what I remember when on those times. And then I just say, okay, I have to keep doing this because it's important. So yeah, that's thank you for sharing that, because I guess we do get heard pretty soon.
Yeah. Yeah. And he did recover, you know. It took
Yeah.
it took about a year altogether, but
Yeah.
he recovered and he's good.
And I know it was hard to share this on this platform too, right? So have you had other places that you were able to, you kind of hesitated to share, but you did anyway?
I did create a video.
Mm-hmm.
It's long, it's like 15 minutes. So I did create a video telling the story because um, people sort of in the kirtan and chanting community here in Montana um, had heard some of them had heard the story of that. And but if I tried to tell that story, in a gathering, I just didn't think I could get through it. So finally I recorded it. So I do have a recording of it on my YouTube channel of the whole story, and then and a web page on my website. So that was sort of my out, that, if anyone asked me, instead of trying to go through, telling a painful story repeatedly, I would say, well, I have a video you could watch.
I know that's
So
true.
so
Yeah.
no, I don't really tell that story. This is probably the first time in quite a while that that's come
Yeah,
out.
yeah. As you were sharing, I could sense that my eyes were getting a little teary for no reason. Like, I wasn't feeling emotional, but I could feel the connection. Like, okay, this is getting intense.
Right.
Yeah. And so for someone new to chanting, what or where would you have them suggest to start from?
I would say probably start with very simple chants. When I started attending other people's kirtan, I remember there was a woman here in town who would do one occasionally, and she had a chant that was only like Gopala. That's it, just chanting that name. And then some of the simple ones like Sita Ram, or ones that are just a single mantra versus a bhajan that might be 4, 8 lines long with more complex Sanskrit, because I have found that the Sanskrit does scare people away a bit. So that's what I would say, to start with very simple mantras. Hare Krishna is an example, Om Namah Shivaya, where that's not a barrier. Um, yeah, that would be my major advice. And a lot of the things that I did in the early years here, starting like 7 years ago, that's what I would do. And then when I got a group of people that had been coming for, regularly for a while, then they would really get a kick out of learning something that was more complicated, Om Triambakam or Om Asatoma or the Apadamapa mantra or something that is, uh, a bit of a tongue twister,
Right.
but they would get a kick out of having that challenge. But that was a few years in. That was probably 3 or 4 years in. And so I spent a long time, doing things that were much more accessible for people and would allow them to get that sense of the sound moving through, and the sound affecting their chakras and how it would be affecting them psychologically and emotionally, so they would get a sense for the power of it and then be willing to put in the effort, to learn things that were more complicated or more difficult rhythms and that kind of thing. So start simple. That's my advice.
Awesome. And what is your personal meaning of chanting beyond the sound itself?
You mean like the meaning of the word or the meaning of the practice?
Like practice, like how did the chanting resonate for you beyond just the sound of it?
I would say The main thing was that I felt a connection to something outside myself. Like I would feel a connection to an energy field. And it was to the point that I could even feel a difference between some mantras and others. So some mantras, especially the ones that are traditional, that millions of people have chanted, perhaps for thousands of years, that there it's like it's created a force field. And when you chant that, you're tapping into that. So that would be that would probably be one of the most significant things for me is that I felt so much energy flowing through my body, my mind, my emotions, everything. There was so much energy in that practice. And I had done a lot of different spiritual practices, starting as a teenager, all the way through. And this one felt the most powerful to me of anything that I had done.
Chanting.
And that yeah, that so it became my foundation. So I tend to have a lot of goals in life, and I have like these charts that I create for every week, what I'm going to do each day, and I mean everything down to like checking a box that I took my vitamins. But then the bigger things too, what I'm doing on the website, what I'm doing for business, the exercise, everything. And and there have been times when I rebel against my own level of control and discipline, and I can throw everything away except my hour of chanting every day. That is the only thing that I hold on to in all circumstances. Whether I'm on vacation, if I'm in a place where I can't bring my harmonium, then I'll have things that I have recorded on my phone, the YouTube channel, or just things that I have on my phone, and I'll just find a place where I can hide away and just, do my chanting quietly for an hour. So that has become like the stable element in my life. Everything else can change, but that has been a very stable element. Um, Probably a little over 3 years now. Before that, I chanted all the time because I loved it. It wasn't like I was requiring it of myself. Um, and sometimes, some days I'd chant 20 minutes, and other days I'd chant for 3 or 4 hours. It really varied. But I did reach a point a few years ago where I felt like making that commitment, like this is what I will do for an hour every day. And if I have events, it might be more, but it will never be less. And and I wanted to see what would happen. I had taken a mantra course with Namadeva, who is an American Vedic scholar, not alive now, but he's written a bunch of books, and so I took. They had like a master mantra course that you could take. They had recorded all of the workshops that he had done over the years, and then there was a big binder with it. And so I bought that, and one of the things he said was commit to chanting for an hour a day and everything in your life will change. Like, hold on, because your life will really change. So there was a number of circumstances about 3 years ago that were very challenging with some of my older kids. And I thought, that's it. Okay, this is what I'm going to make this commitment. Like this is a lifetime commitment, actually. Like this is what I will offer for whatever transformation can be done, whatever mercy, whatever can be given in those situations, for others as well as in my own life. So, so that's what chanting means to me. That it's really the sort of the pole star that I just hang on to.
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing, Kathleen. So, along the lines of how you were sharing earlier, how you feel the energy while chanting, can you explain a little bit of how sound interacts with the energy body of ours?
Um, I think a sound, if there's various systems, but if you look at it where you have your physical body, and some people have described it as sort of interlocking sieves, like sieves. Is that how you pronounce it? It's the thing that you would pour noodles into and the water goes out, but the noodles stay in.
Save?
Sieve. Okay. So those. And then you have the physical one, and then you have, the mental, the emotional, the energetic, and it sort of goes out from there. That what you're trying to do is line up the holes there so that the light can shine out and the light can shine in and the energy can shine in. So I I think the sound works really well with that um, because the sound can penetrate in the physical and it operates at all those different levels at once. So, my experience has been that it's like plugging into an electrical socket and it's literally feeling that vibration, like I would think that I'm shaking, but I'm not. I'm still. But there's so much energy going through that that's how it feels. And so I just think that the energy it's creating form. It's creating form at all those different levels. And it's obviously running through the meridians or the marma points or, based on the different systems, the nadis, the channels. So you're sending that energy. And one of the things about chanting in Sanskrit is that because you're placing your tongue in different places in your mouth and you're repeating it, you are connecting those meridians. So I know, my parents, my father, for example, he was saying, well, why do you just say it over and over? Why do you say the same thing over and over? But it's like an acupressure thing, where you would like keep pushing the point over and over. So you're doing that, you're touching the same place by repeating it over and over. And I think that was one of the things that fascinated me about the healing aspect, like the vocal medicine aspect, is that particular mantras would be used to send energy to heal different systems. And the ancient rishis who developed the science of mantra, that it's really in service of their connection to God. So the truth is it's all in service of meditation. Yoga is to develop a strong physical body so that you can sit and you can, not be uncomfortable and not be distracted. And the mantras as well were developed to serve the stillness and the meditation. So if you're in a cave and you're not necessarily getting the nutrition and the sunlight and the exercise and everything, the sound is going through your body and is stimulating those systems. So in the Ayurvedic tradition, then there are certain mantras that would be for stimulating the hormonal system or strengthening the skeletal system or your lungs and your breath. So so that to me is part of the beauty of mantras is that it's serving on so many levels simultaneously. And it's a physical practice, but it's also a spiritual practice because you're focusing your mind, to some degree. Your mind can still wander, when you're chanting, but to some degree in order to maintain the flow and not to lose your place, or if you're playing an instrument or if you're counting like on mala beads, because you're doing a certain number, you're doing a novena. So it does engage you at different levels. And I have experimented a lot with not only which mantras are the most powerful, but at what point it starts to become stronger. For example, what I discovered was if if I'm same chanting for an hour, so you could break that up many different ways. You could do a dozen chants for 5 minutes each, or you could do six for 10 minutes, or you could do four for 15 minutes, or you could do the same chant for an entire hour. And so I've experimented a lot to see, like, at what point do I feel a settling sense within my being and a sense that I'm fully concentrated. And I could tell that because I could feel how much energy was flowing. I could literally feel in my arms and legs, if the energy had reached like a full body thing. It's like I don't know, uh, like if the bliss is in your cells, and not just in your mind. You can actually feel it. And I found that it would take 10 minutes. I would have to do the same chant for at least 10 minutes to reach that point. So then I thought, all right, well, then I have to, set a minimum, like 10 minutes for a certain chant. And if I really felt I needed a strong action, then I would do the same chant for an entire hour. And that varies. I try to be I tend to be a little rigid, and so I try to be more gentle with myself. And if I'm sitting there and like this past weekend, for example, I did a Spartan race, which is an obstacle course race. So I'm fairly sore at this point. That race was on Sunday. I'm still recovering. I did it with one of my kids. I
Yeah.
couldn't have even finished if I didn't have one of my son, my 24-year-old son was helping me. We were a team, and I would not have gotten over the obstacles without his help. But at any rate, so in the last few days, like the first day after that, I could not sit for an hour, sit on the floor with my legs bent. I was too sore. So I had to do half an hour, take a break, do other things, and come back later. So it's not totally rigid. But the ideal for me, what I feel is the most powerful, is to do a full hour and do every chant that I do at least 10 minutes and really focus and feel that chant and and why I'm choosing that. If I'm choosing it because I'm aware of someone who needs healing, then I might do the medicine Buddha matcha. If I'm aware that someone in my world is dealing with financial problems or addiction problems or whatever it is, someone that I'm aware of, then I might choose a more intense, I might chant to Durga and Kali or Shiva, do a whole hour of only chants to Shiva. So so it's flexible. I've tried having like a set, like these are the mantras that I'm going to do every single day. And I found that wasn't actually flexible enough, to feel like what I'm doing is a practice that's responding to what's happening in my life. So I've gone back to, okay, I do the hour, but within that, it's more flexible.
It's more fluid.
It's more fluid. Yes, it is more fluid.
But if you take a chant, you do it for at least 10 minutes, right?
Yes,
Any chant.
most of the time.
Okay.
Yes.
And what would you recommend? Like, this has been coming up for me. Like, for example, in the past, you may have had a chant that you may have done for a few years, but then something else came up in your life, like some other chant came up. These do happen, right? So you picked that up and you started to learn it, you're practicing it, and you're doing it. In that meantime, you're not doing what you were doing before. So,
Yes.
but few years down the road after this new thing came up, you were actually again pointed back to the original one. What is your take on that?
Mhm. Hmm. Yeah, I think it's just, um, I think like life does go in cycles.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm not an astrologer, but
Right.
I do appreciate the idea that there are cycles that come back and come through. And whether it's a 12-year cycle or months or your birthday every year or, different cycles. So I do think that things, if you had a dedication, like I had a very intense dedication to Durga chants at one point, and and then when you come back to that, if something else comes up in life, it's like you've had an experience with which chants seem to be the most effective in different situations. I don't know if I told you about the one time when this was fairly early on. I was staying at the home of a friend of a friend, and on my way, it was quite a long drive from here. It was out of state, and I was attending a conference for one of my clients. I was doing marketing in the natural health world, and I really felt anxious, and then discovered on the way there that the home where I was going to be staying, that someone had committed suicide. And it had actually happened a couple of years before, but I knew, wow, there's something very strong that's still going on here. And when I got there and I was assigned to stay in the room where this person had lived, not where they had died, but where they had lived most of their life. And there was so much grief in that particular room. I couldn't even sleep in the bed. I was just, if I lay down on the bed and I couldn't stop sobbing. It was like you could just feel that the soul had not gone free and the family was still locked into the grief of the situation. So I didn't know what to do. I didn't have enough experience at that point. It was probably only a year or two into me really chanting to know, like, what do I do? But one of the family members insisted that I chant in that room because I had said, I chant an hour every day. I can go in your basement. I don't want to disturb anyone early in the morning. They said, "Oh no, no, you can chant right in that room." And so I did. And anytime I wasn't at the conference, I was chanting everything I could think of and didn't know, how to focus it. Um, and it was helpful. I mean, by the second day or so, I could sleep more, and by the time the conference was over and I left, the family had decided to sell the house and decided to really take steps, to move on, in their lives. So after that, I thought, wow, I have to learn because it was a form of exorcism, I think, just cutting the soul free to move on. Um, and it wasn't a negative haunting in the sense of anything traumatic going on, but it was just everything was locked. There just hadn't been freedom or healing. And so that got me very interested in, what would be the most effective mantras in different situations. So since then, um, I called my Cohen actually and said, what would you recommend? This was after the fact, because when I was in the middle of it, I was either chanting or at this conference and it was, day and night and there wasn't a lot of time to spare. But he said, well, Shiva chants are always good in a situation like that. So, over time now, I sort of, have the sense there was a tragedy last fall. One of my oldest son's closest friends also committed suicide. But then I was prepared, and then I knew, okay, so I really have to dedicate myself to Shiva for a while, to for that soul to be free and also to protect my own sons who were deeply affected um, from that grief and from all that had led up to that tragic situation. So I do think that different mantras, there's mantras for healing, there's mantras for joy, there's mantras for comfort, the Divine Mother, there's mantras when you need something that is for release and freedom, and so some of that has been study and talking to other people. I communicate with people who find my YouTube channel, for example, that are in other parts of the country or the world and then we'll discuss, well, what is your experience? What have you learned? So so trying to learn because there is a different vibration. I think that's the reason why, especially in Sanskrit, but I'm sure in other languages too, like every consonant has a different energy. Is it David Frowley? There's a few mantra books that are really good that help to break things down like that and say, okay, the K, like Kali, cream, Kleem, that those
The
are,
Bija mantras.
yeah, the Bij mantras, that there are um, different energies. There's softer ones, there's ones that are more forceful, and that you have to be careful using the more forceful ones and the ones that are directly for the chakras, for example. So you have to be careful using those. Most people will recommend that you don't do those kind of chants more than a few minutes a day when you start, just to watch your own emotional reaction, what's happening in your life and your world, and that you can gradually increase that if you feel like, you're able to stay in balance. But then there's other ones that you can do, Shanti. Um, you could do that forever, and there would be no negative consequences. It would only be, harmony and peace. But there are ones that you have to be a little more careful with. So it's a science. It's a lifetime study.
Yeah, I agree. And I think also when you start on those powerful ones, it's just that we need to be more grounded. That's what it's talking about. Like those transformative ones, they ask you to have that like deep rootedness so that way you're present. So you're not like jumbled all over the place. because it rattles you. And when that rattling happens, you want to not shake up, or you don't want to lose yourself, but you should be present. You should be present with your emotions, with your energies, and try to see what it's bringing up, and kind of release what doesn't serve you, and kind of absorb what's meant for you. So that's probably what is happening with those. But yes, if starting off with few minutes would be a great idea. And I think the other thing they would suggest is also having a teacher, to
Mhm,
study those under a
mhm.
teacher who
Right.
has experience of guiding you, navigating you. So it's not like you don't feel lost.
Right. Yeah, I lived in a spiritual community for 10 years, and we never did the bija mantras for the chakras unless we were in the presence of the woman who was our guru in that community. But we did bhajans. You could do bhajans anytime, and those are, just joyful and uplifting.
Beautiful. So, have you noticed a global shift in how people are receiving sacred chants in today's world?
Hmm, that's a really good question. Um, I think is it is probably going to become a very prominent practice worldwide. I really think like this is the age, for this. And it is fairly universal. Every culture has a tradition of singing sacred words. The Jewish and Hebrew tradition has that, the Christian tradition, especially like back in the day with the Latin Mass, which was, a little bit before my time, but my parents, were part of that era. And I think it's like it's an antidote to social media, if you could put it that way, because it's chanting, especially chanting with other people, like the practice of kirtan or mantra classes or, anything where you're with other people. They say that it's more effective than talk therapy. It changes your brain, changes the chemicals in your brain, reduces cortisol, increases dopamine and oxytocin, for example. And I think that it really will catch on because even if there isn't an understanding of the background, which which is a lot, which is a lot to study and to gain, and especially those of us in the West, like it's hard to know where to start, because there are so many. I mean, in Christianity, we have the Old Testament and the New Testament, but you can see behind me, I actually have a friend who spent a lifetime collecting a library of works, and about 6 weeks ago, he gave me his whole collection. And so I have spent a lot of my time the last month. I probably have 80 boxes of books, and I would say at least 30 to 40% are all on spiritual topics. And he had the most amazing collection of like Vedas I've never even heard of, and sutras, and this person's translation and that person's translation. And I'm like, whoa, this is incredible. So I wouldn't have even known where to start to collect the books that would allow me to see, um, you know, uh, the original script and then a translation of it, and then be able to compare this person's translation and that person's translation, and then all of the details of the marma points and the nadis and where they run and which sounds affect them. I mean, I knew that's what I wanted to learn, but I didn't know how how to even find them, how to even find, they're not the kind of books that are usually available on Amazon, they're more a specific niche. So that was an incredible gift from my friend and from the universe that, okay, you want to learn these things? You've been at it 7 or 8 years now. I guess it's about time. So, so that's my son just built these bookshelves behind me, and we are literally building bookshelves like in half our house to accommodate
The books.
1,500, 2,000 of the books, everything that I'll keep for myself. So it really is, there is a whole science behind it, but you don't even have to know that science. I think that it's people are on social media because they want connection. But it's a filtered connection, and it's a connection that is sometimes going through unhealthy filters. And when you are singing in a group, even people that come and don't know anything about the practice, um, and just feel the feeling of singing together with others and the comfort of singing something, um, because, it takes, if it's a simple mantra, maybe they hear it 10 or 12 times and then most people have got it. And then, being able to chant like that, I think people come back because it felt so good. And even if they don't understand the brain chemistry or all of the meridians and the nutties and, all the things that are going on behind it, or the idea um, that that God is in thousands of different frequencies, and that different deities are embodying a certain characteristic or a certain frequency or a certain vibration. So you can think of it that way, without knowing all the stories that are behind, all of them. And the fact that, many of them are historical. I think I really love all the work that's being done, and there's quite a number of great channels on YouTube where they're going back and they're authenticating the history of these things. The Saraswati River actually existed, Ramasitu, the bridge actually existed, and Dwarka was a city. It's not just mythology, it's actual people, which I think is really helpful on a number of levels. And one is that these were people who actually lived. It's like the idea, there's a difference. I've done a lot of research also into the historical stories of Jesus and the different texts that are showing that he traveled in the East, that he studied, that he was in monasteries, that he probably was chanting mantras, I mean, that it is a path, it's an ancient path of self-transformation. And so I just find that really encouraging that these were people, in many cases, that at some point walked the earth and followed a path and developed what we now would say are miraculous abilities, but it's really our heritage. It's not a matter of worshiping them as much as honoring and recognizing what they achieved and following in their footsteps, versus worshiping them, I guess. It's a it's a fine line there. Some people are also put off by the idea that, oh, you're worshiping all these deities. But that's only a part of it. I think the important part is that these these are examples for us. They're like, elder brothers and sisters. They're further along than we are, but the important thing is following that path ourselves, and not necessarily relying on just calling or just doing a mantra to a particular deity. It's also self-reflection, and how can I embody the qualities that I am calling on in this mantra. So I think when you get to the point, and you don't have to do that in the beginning, in the beginning, it's just the joy of it, the joy of singing and the joy of the music. But I do think further along the line, the awareness of the purpose of it, to embody those qualities, to be those qualities yourself, um, is probably the the original intent, perhaps, of why they were way showers for us.
Yeah, it's kind of like they take you on a journey, a deeper journey. Kind of starts off more lighter and then it goes deeper over time. Right. So as we're reaching the end of our podcast today, I want you to share one message from your book that you would love everyone to remember.
Okay. That would be the need for spiritual protection, because that's something that isn't covered a lot, especially in kirtan. And um, I think it's something to really be aware of. For example, anytime you are trying to improve yourself, if you decide at the beginning of the year you're going to go to the gym every day and it's January and by March you're not going to the gym anymore, well, something opposed that, whether it was something within you or, some momentum that you had. So my point here is that there are things within and without that are not necessarily assisting us in making progress. You want to sit down to meditate, but right at that moment, there's a child crying, the food on the stove burns, So so I do think that imagining light around yourself, calling for light, praying for light, chanting whatever it is that you do that works to seal yourself, I think that's very important. And I have just had so many experiences where people say, every time I try to come to kirtan, one of my kids calls me or something happens at work. And so there's things that may intervene in different ways that would prevent you from establishing a practice, whatever that is for yourself, yoga, meditation, chanting. So I think that that's sort of a missing link. And in the book, I I was a little hesitant to put information about Kali in the book because Kali is such an intense goddess and can be very controversial, and the images of Kali are a little off-putting. And so I was concerned about putting that in the book. And I remember I have a friend who was helping me to publish the book, and she's professional in the publishing industry. And so we really talked about that one, like, should this be in the book or should this not be in the book? And eventually, I said, yeah, this has to be in there. There has to be an awareness that that there is a side to spirituality where, like the Buddha, touching the earth, like, I will stay, I will do this, I will meditate, I will chant, I will go and work out in the gym, whatever it is, whatever self-improvement, that you do have to seal that, you do have to protect that. Um, so I would say that's probably um, an important message that I don't know is out there in the New Age world, where it's everything's beautiful and love and peace, and that's fantastic. And I think that it's more sustainable if you also have the awareness that I do need to protect, to seal the space where I practice and that kind of thing.
It is very powerful. Thank you for sharing, Kathleen. I was just reflecting on that this morning, coincidentally or synchronicity, whatever you call it. But if something is pulling you away from your practice, you should also enforce yourself to kind of go into the practice, because if that something is pulling you away, you should also have that awareness to get you back in there. It's very on point and very much needed for all of us.
And thank you. It was wonderful to talk to you today.
Thank you, Kathleen. I appreciate your time as always. Thanks for tuning in. Take a deep breath, carry the peace with you, and I will see you next time.